Hey Hawks, we are going to move on with our next assignment, and it's going to be a futuristic city 2-point perspective good copy. We are going to choose our favorite draft from last week. We'll choose one of the two versions that we did, our favorite one, and then we're going to grab a letter size piece of paper and we're going to draw a good copy, and this time we're going to shade it in with more detail and a range of pencils. So ideally, you've got some pencils at home, hopefully an HB, a 2B, and maybe some pencils that are soft and harder, and we're going to create gradation. We're basically going to take a lot of the skills that we learned at the beginning of the semester with three-dimensional forms, things like spheres, value scales, and we're going to take what we learned with 2-point perspective, and even, of course, what we learned with observational drawing with our shoe, and put it all together to sort of create, a quote-unquote final project here. And it's going to be all in pencil with an imaginary light source, and we're basically going to extend, develop, and draw as best we can a realistic three-dimensional city from our imaginations that follows the rules of 2-point perspective. So here's how I would get yourself set up, guys. I know those little draft drawings were kind of small and they don't have to be perfect, but now we're going to move to a letter size or bigger version. When I say letter size paper, this just means the standard size that comes out of your binder, a standard size paper that comes out of your printer or whatever. Notice how I've got my drawing in the middle here, and I've done some Sharpie marker on mine only just so that you can see it on the camera. But really, I just want to start with pencil, and I'm going to shade things in, and I'm not going to outline them like this. I'm going to shade just like we've done with the other assignments this year. Notice how this piece of paper has extensions. So sometimes I find it's kind of more realistic if you put your horizon lines outside of your drawing, or your vanishing points on the horizon line outside of the drawing. So what that does is things just won't look as squished. So I took 3 pieces of letter paper and I taped the 2 extensions on the side. I just had this green tape. Maybe you can find something else, Scotch tape, hockey tape, I don't know, whatever works. And then if you want to, you can draw yourself a border. That way it just keeps it cleaner. You don't have to go all the way to the edge. And then begin to build in pencil a good, larger copy with ruler and build out your city. Obviously, mine's not done. This is just the beginning. I created a foreground, middle ground, background, and I'm kind of getting my composition started. But eventually, of course, I'm going to shade this, and it's going to have all those other elements that we were looking for. So remember the assignment last week. We're looking for the following things in this finished drawing. 5 to 7 forms, at least 2 of which have to be cubes or rectangles, shapes or forms that use the 2 vanishing points. Other forms might be spheres, cones, cylinders, which may or may not follow vanishing points, but at least 2 of the 5 to 7 forms have to be straight angle cubes. We want to keep our horizon line and our verticals at 90 degrees. So if our horizon line is straight, then the angles or the straight edges of the shapes are straight up and down. If our horizon line is tilted, then we make sure that the middle edges of buildings are also at 90 degrees to that horizon line. We want to go foreground, middle, background, creating a sense of space. Of course, we want to make sure that we use 2-point linear perspective. This is not a 1-point perspective assignment. Overlap various shapes, one in front of the other, and create scale changes. By that, we mean things that are bigger or closer, and then as things go away, they get a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller. Scale changes. We want a good value range of pencil. We want to break the picture plane so you can see that my big shape right here is busting out of the border. We want a single light source. You decide where it's going to be. And we want a nice positive balance of negative space, which is the space around forms, and positive space, which is the space that the actual forms themselves take up. If it looks uneven, arrange, balance things out so it looks evenly weighted. We also want a sense of atmospheric perspective. Well, what the heck is that? We haven't really talked about atmospheric perspective yet. Here is what I mean. If we look at this photograph here of this landscape, we can see how the trees and hills, cliffs that are closer to us appear sharper and more colorful. Way off in the distance, we can see how the mountains begin to fade. They become a little bit more fuzzy, less detailed, more less saturated with color. This is a real observed thing that we see in nature. And in your final copy of your futuristic city, I'd like you to have some things in the background way far away that have atmospheric perspective, or they are a little bit fuzzy on the edges. Take your eraser and maybe make some of those edges not as sharp as the things in the front. So those are all of the elements we're looking for this final assignment. Now, one thing before we get started is that not all forms follow 2 points of perspective, or vanishing points, as we mentioned. What if you've got cylinders? Well, if those cylinders are straight up and down, they will be looking kind of like this. A cylinder that's below the horizon line will see the top of it. Now, notice how this is a perfectly symmetrical ellipse, similar to the ellipses that we did on our spheres at the very beginning of the semester. They're not pointed footballs. They are not like sausages or track-shaped. They are not parallel lines. It's an ellipse, so every single thing is curved, and the curve on the top of the cylinder is mirror reflection, same curve as the one on the bottom. And this curve right here is the exact same curve as that guy there. So these are always consistent. They don't change. But as it goes below the horizon line, we kind of like see the top here. If it was at the horizon line, we see just a little bit of a curve here, but not as exaggerated. And then if this imaginary cylinder was above the horizon line, we would see the bottom of it. So the ellipse would be here, and then the curve would go like that. You can see how we look down, middle, and here we're looking up. The same thing would be true of cones. A little bit of a curve at the bottom of a cone. It's never going to be a perfectly straight line unless we're looking at it dead on. It's always going to have a little bit of a curve. And then if this imaginary cone were upside down, floating in the air, we'd only see the bottom. And if it were down below the horizon line, looking down, it would be even more curved at the bottom. Somewhat like the cylinder, the perspective changes. Now, sometimes we've got a hybrid of the two. Sometimes we have like a cone meets like a bit of a cube, or in this case, a pyramid. So here, we're kind of just making up the top of the triangle. In my case, I tried to keep these verticals vertical so my pyramid wasn't like leaning over and looking like the leaning tower of pyramid. And notice how the bottom of my pyramid goes to VP right, and this one here goes to VP left. These lines underneath this floating pyramid above the horizon line are going to the VPs, and then this guy down here, VP left, VP right. So that would be, more of a hybrid where you're sometimes using the VPs and sometimes not. Another thing that we want to consider is foreshortening. And the other thing we want to realize is that when we look at objects in space and we see the side of it, we can easily get a sense of its length. So here I'm looking at this ruler and I can obviously see how long it is. Also, it has numbers. Well, what if I take my pencil and I hold it like this, and we can easily see its length. But the moment we begin to turn the pencil, it starts to shorten. It looks like it's not as long as it used to be, and the angle completely changes. And here, of course, it doesn't look very long at all. Now the length of the pencil didn't change, it's only that our perspective changed. This is called foreshortening. And when we drew our shoe at the beginning of the semester, remember we tilted it on an angle and we talked about foreshortening? And what it meant is that the front of our shoe was actually just a little bit longer than the back because that front looked closer to us. So the same thing may be happening in your futuristic city. If you have a form that is going away from us, for example, here's a cylinder, and instead of my cylinder going straight up in the air, it's sort of tilted and laying on its side. And here I would want to take into account foreshortening. As things move away from us, they become smaller. So here I've used the sides of my cylinder and I've taken them to a VP. So you may want to keep in mind foreshortening as you begin to draw some of the shapes in your futuristic city. All right, guys, give it a shot and see how we do. This will be a more extended project of 2 weeks because we're looking for an extensive amount of shading and detail as much as you can.